Hello everyone, my name is Ashish and you are watching the Ultimate Dev Academy. In this video, we are going to learn about promises in JavaScript. So without wasting any time, let's roll the intro and get started. Promises in JavaScript are a way to handle asynchronous code execution. They provide a way to write asynchronous code that is more readable and easier to understand. So let's start by creating a promise. The syntax for creating a promise is we create a variable, say promise. You can create whatever name you like, and then we'll create the promise constructor. So we'll say new promise like this, and in here we'll pass a function with two arguments. So there's a function with two arguments, resolve and reject. The name doesn't matter, you can name it whatever you want, and then we can write some code here. This function, which we have provided inside the promise constructor, is known as the executor function, and it is responsible for executing the asynchronous code. The executor function takes two arguments, the resolve function and the reject function. The resolve function will be executed if the promise is fulfilled, and the reject function will be executed if the promise is rejected. Don't worry, that's a lot of terminology, but I'm going to explain it to you bit by bit, and towards the end of the video, I'll give a practical example of how to use promise in real life. So make sure you watch the video till the end. Now, let's take an example to understand this in a better fashion. So we'll remove this some code here and we'll put in some actual code. So to simulate the asynchronous code, we'll use setTimeout function. So let's say setTimeout. Now what we are going to do is, we're going to create a promise that returns the value of a number after 2 seconds. So we'll say setTimeout, and in here we'll pass in a function, and here we'll resolve our promise with the data of 10. Okay? And we'll set the time to 2000 milliseconds. That is 2 seconds. So we have created a promise that resolves after 2 seconds and sends the data 10. Now in real life scenario, what will happen is you will have some data from API, so you will wait for that asynchronous code to execute, and in the resolve function you will get that data from the API. So here we are passing the value of 10. Now how to use this promise? You will have to take this variable. Here we have created promise. Now if you have created something else, for example xyz, so you will say xyz dot then. I will be using promise dot then. So I'll say promise dot then. So we will use the then function, and in here the then function receives the data which we have sent from the resolve function. So here we can use value like this to capture the data which we have received from the resolve function, and we can print it on the console. So we can say console.log value like this, and you can see that we will get 10 after 2 seconds. 1, 2, and we get 10 here. Okay, now the another way to write this is we can directly write console.log here. This is say, console.log like this, and this console.log will receive the data directly from the resolve function and it will print it on the console. The another method which we can use with promise is the catch method. So what we can do is we can say promise dot catch like this, and this catch method is used to specify what should happen when the promise is rejected. Again, this takes a single argument which is a function, and that will be called with the value that was passed to the reject function. For example, if I take error here like this, and we can say console.log error like this. And if we want to test this out, we need to change this resolve to reject. So we'll say reject, and we can pass in anything here. For example, if I say some error like this, and you can see after 2 seconds we will get some error on the console. And again, we don't need to write the complete function. We can just provide console.log in here, and we will get the same functionality like this. You can see that after 2 seconds, we will have some error like this. Now, there's another method which we can use with the promise, and that is the finally method. The finally method is used to specify what should happen when the promise is either fulfilled or rejected. Okay, so the finally method takes a single argument, that is a function, and it will be called regardless of whether the promise is rejected or fulfilled. So we can say here console.log, for example, promise executed, like this. And you can see after 2 seconds, we will get some error and then the promise executed. If we use the resolve function here to resolve the promise, like this, you can see that we'll get first the value from the promise and then we'll get the promise executed. Okay, now these then method, catch method, and finally method can be chained together as well. So let's see an example. This time we saw how to create a promise with a variable. This time let's see how to create it the function. So I'll say let get username. So for example, you want to get the username from some API. Okay, this will return a promise. So we can say return new promise. So the syntax remains the same. You will use the promise constructor. Inside this, you'll pass a function with 2 parameters, that is resolve and reject, like this. And inside here will go your asynchronous code. For example, okay, sorry, we are using the arrow function syntax, so we don't need to use the return keyword. So we can directly say new promise like this. And inside here, you need to specify what the promise is doing, basically your asynchronous code. So to simulate the asynchronous code, again, we'll use set timeout like this. And in here, we'll write a function and we'll first resolve the promise. So we'll say resolve, and this time I'll pass in my name here. So I'll say Ashish like this. That's great. We'll provide a time. This time let's provide a time of 1000 milliseconds, that is 1 second. Now to access this data from the promise, what we have to use is we have to use the then method. So we can say get username like this, we can call the function like this, and then we'll use then to capture the data which we have received from the promise. The then method, we can directly say console.log like this. And you can see that we are getting Ashish on the console after 1 second. Now, as I told you, we can chain this then, catch, and finally methods. We can directly write the catch method like this. And here we can say again just console.log like this to capture the error. And then we can chain the finally method, I'm sorry, like this. And in here we can provide a function, say it will say done like this. Okay, so now you can see that here we are getting the promise, we are getting the data from the promise, that is Ashish, then we are getting finally, and then this promise is being executed here because now this is getting displayed later because here we have given the delay of 2000 milliseconds. Here the delay is of 1000 milliseconds. That is why this promise is getting executed before the earlier one. I hope that is self-understood. Okay, we have seen that this works with the resolve function. We can also reject the function. So we can say reject like this, and we can throw in some error like this, and you can see that we will get some error like this. So we have learned how to create a promise and how to using the then, catch, and finally method. Now let's see a promise in action. Now, before that, I want to tell you that promises in JavaScript have three states. The pending state, that is the initial state, that in that time the promise has neither been fulfilled or nor been rejected. Then the promise gets either fulfilled or rejected. The promise object is a property called state, which returns the current state of the promise. Now, the promises are widely used in modern web development, and it's important to understand for anyone working with JavaScript. It is also important for you to note that promises are not just limited to handle asynchronous operations. Although whatever I have shown you here is the example of asynchronous code, but it is not necessary that we use promises only for asynchronous operations. It can also be used in synchronous operations. But I don't know why someone will use promise for synchronous operations. But I just wanted to know that this is possible. You can use promises for synchronous operations as well. And it is a good practice to add the catch method and the finally method at the end of the promise to handle any kind of error and to show that the promise has been completed. Okay. Having said that, let's get on to a practical example. Now, to take the practical example, we will use dummy JSON. If you don't know what dummy JSON is, so let me go to dummy JSON like this, and here this is the website dummyjson.com, and if we read the docs, you can see that we can get a lot of things from dummy JSON. It is a simple online tool that allows you to generate some fake JSON data for testing purposes. Okay, so we'll use this particular code. Let me just delete all of my code from here. Okay, let's just copy this code and paste it. Okay, now this is a very simple but excellent example to understand the basics of promises in JavaScript. Okay, now one thing which you need to note is that we are using the fetch API. Fetch is a browser API and it always returns a promise. So earlier, if I show you, earlier we were using a function, like we were using get username and we were returning a promise from there, right? So the fetch is a browser API which automatically returns a promise. So fetch always returns a promise. Keep that in mind. Okay, I'll delete this. Here we'll copy that code again. Okay, so here we are fetching some fake products from dummyjson.com, and then we are using .then method to capture the data. So as I told you that we are taking the data in this res method, and then we are converting the data into JSON, res.json. This JSON method is used to convert the data into JSON format. Okay, now let's visualize this all. Okay, so let me just open the console. Yeah, here we have the console, and you can see that we have got the output on the console. We have the products and all those things, and here we can see that this is happening because of this console.log statement. So here we have changed two then statements. The data is coming from the API, and then we are using this then method. So let's visualize this step by step. Let me just remove this, and if I directly write console.log here, what happens? Okay, let me just remove this statement, and you can see that we are getting a response. Okay, we are getting a response. This response has a lot of things. Okay, so this is the complete data which we were getting, and out of this response we were converting this complete response into the JSON format so that we could use that. But let me show you the execution of the promise. Okay, so if I remove this, and if I just say console.log, and if we wrap this fetch statement, you can see that this is the promise. This fetch statement is returning a promise, and you can see that the promise state is which is the response. Now, how to use this response is by using the then method. Okay, so you can see that this is a prototype. The prototype here is promise. So this fetch is returning a promise, and as I told you that every promise has a state. It can be pending, it can be fulfilled, it can be rejected. So here the state is showing pending, and you can see if I click here, if I hover here, you can see this value was evaluated upon the first expanding. It may have changed since then. So when we called the fetch method, state of the promise was pending, and then it was later fulfilled when we got the data, and here is the response. Now, to take the response, what we need to do is we need to use the then method. So we can say dot then like this, and here we can have the response. Okay, the name doesn't matter, you can name it whatever you want. And if I'll write console.log response like this, you can see that we are getting the complete response. Okay, so if you want to use the response, what we can do is we can convert this response into JSON. For example, we will remove this console.log statement. We'll say res.json like this, and now we can use another then method. So when we are using another then method, this res.json is getting passed to the another then method. Here we can use data, for example, and we can say console.log data like this, and you can see that we will get this complete array of products. If you want to access a specific part of this data, for example, if I want to just access the products, what we can do is we can just say data.products like this, and it will give you the products array. You can see that we are getting all these 30 items. Okay, so this is how you access a promise in a real life example. Now let's take example when the promise is rejected. Okay, so instead of dummy JSON, if I just change the URL to dummy JSON, which is not a valid URL, obviously the promise will fail, and you can see that we are getting an error. Now in a way, now if we want to better handle this error, if we want to show the user some output, we can use the catch method. So here we can just say dot catch, and in here we can use the error, and we can write the error like this. Sorry, we can say some error received like this, and here we can specify the error as well. Yeah, like this. Now as you can see that it should be console.log like this. Yeah, and you can see that now on the console we are getting some error received, and then we are displaying the type error failed to fetch. So you can see that this way we can use the catch method to handle the errors properly, and you can show the user that some error has occurred and some information about the error which we are receiving from the backend. Now at last we can also use the finally method like this, and here we can say that the promise has been executed. So we can just say console.log, and we can say promise executed like this, and you can see that we're getting that some error and then the promise executed. If we amend the URL to the actual URL, you will see that we'll get the actual value, and then we will have promise executed like this. Okay, now what we have learned about promises here is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many different ways and many different syntax in which we can use the promises in our project. However, the fundamentals remain the same. This is the way you will see promises in most places. But if you want a better understanding of promises, you must go to the official documentation. So if I say, so I'll just show you promises MDN like this, and this is the official documentation of promise. So just go here and read this complete documentation, and maybe you'll not understand everything at one go. If you don't understand something, just come back here, comment exactly where you're stuck, and I'll try my best to help you guys. And I also want to let you know that there's an even more modern async await syntax which was introduced in ES7, and which can be used to easily handle the asynchronous code. We'll learn more about that in the subsequent videos. So if you learned something, please hit the like button, and if you're new here, consider subscribing and press the bell icon so that you don't miss any of our videos in the future. Thank you. See you. Bye bye.